If we condense the history of life into just 24 hours, modern humans, Homo sapiens, appear in the last 8 seconds. In other words, we are not that ancient. However, in those few short seconds representing about 350,000 years of our existence, Earth has changed. In some aspects, not much, but in others, very much. And if you were sent back to the time when humans first appeared, you would see many strange things. But what exactly would you see back then? Homo sapiens were confined to the African continent, and we stayed there for quite a while, not moving much, until anatomically modern humans finally dispersed about 70,000 years ago. Or at least that is the dispersal whose descendants survived to inhabit the world. Throughout this long period of settlement in Africa, our ancestors must have encountered countless different biomes. And of course, the animals that, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you see it, no longer breathe or walk on Earth. You might think of things like saber-toothed tigers, strange elephants, and other bizarre animals of the Pleistocene Ice Age. And although such creatures are found in the rest of the world, that is not what the first modern humans saw. And in fact, many of the iconic animals that we associate with recent prehistory either never lived in Africa or had completely disappeared from the continent by the time we evolved. Conversely, Africa followed a very different path from other regions, and the extinct animals themselves were quite similar to those we have today, but with minor differences. As Paleoloxodon shows, apart from the expanded bone structure on top of its skull, this extinct elephant looked very much like living elephants, especially from a distance. But if you got close to it, you would realize its proportions were very different, because this mammal was a giant and is currently considered the largest land mammal ever to walk. Although it was also the smallest elephant to ever live. Remember, we are talking about a genus and many of its species that varied greatly in size. Most of them went extinct at the end of the Pleistocene, while most of the remaining species were outside Africa, leaving only a single species, Paleoloxodon holenensis, which the first modern humans witnessed. This species, living 130,000 years ago, was not the largest Paleoloxodon, but it was certainly very large, as it is probably a direct descendant of the second largest member, Paleoloxodon reki. And from the few remains we have, it seems holenensis was identical in size to its predecessor. Incredibly, it has recently been estimated that reki stood 4.2 m at the shoulder and weighed 15.3 tons. That makes it heavier than any theropod dinosaur in history, and nearly 50% larger than the heaviest African elephant ever known. And now you are probably not surprised to hear that this size also applied to its tusks. But even for a 1.5-ton elephant, its tusks were unusually large. The genus Paleoloxodon generally had the largest tusk-to-body ratio of any known elephant. As a result, the tusks were as long as the entire body of certain elephant species. These tusks were also straighter than normal and closer to the ground. This allowed Jolensis to easily strike smaller objects and interact with the ground, perhaps using its tusks as shovels in certain situations. And to make this mammal a bit more fearsome, it is believed that the protrusions I mentioned were used to increase the damaging power of the tusks, acting as anchor points for a set of large muscles supporting their heads, allowing them to swing their weapons with tremendous power and speed. One might think that any rational creature would realize that you shouldn't mess with a giant elephant compared to other elephants. However, researchers believe that modern humans may have hunted these giants. Although there is no concrete evidence, we know that other Homo species in Eurasia were capable of hunting and slaughter. They hunted similar-sized Paleoloxodon species with weapons like spears, and we also had javelins. However, if there was hunting, it was probably not random. Given that Paleoloxodon was the largest animal on the entire continent, any attempt would involve countless risks. Furthermore, there were many other large animals that were smaller and less well-equipped to choose from. While this often made hunting easier, smaller does not always mean easier. Just look at Syncerus antiquus, the giant buffalo. Although many times smaller than Paleoloxodon, this extinct bovine was still a threat to society. And in fact, it was the largest bovine ever to live in Africa. Adults were about 3 meters long and 1.85 meters tall at the shoulder, meaning larger than a typical moose. They also had dense muscles and strong bones, giving them a massive appearance, and the largest males often exceeded 2.2 tons, equivalent to the weight of a white rhinoceros. That is the largest rhinoceros on Earth today. And in this comparison, keep in mind that rhinos have armor-like skin, which adds to their weight. While Syncerus antiquus was muscle, bone, and a bit of keratin, as they also had unparalleled horns. Each horn protruded sideways, slightly curved, and could be over 1 meter each, similar to the horns of the water buffalo, a close relative. In the case of the largest individuals, these horns are believed to have reached up to 3 meters from tip to tip, with a horn span as wide as a basketball backboard, and longer than the horns of most ceratopsian dinosaurs, including some that had bodies 3 times as large. To adapt to that giant size and stature, the giant buffalo likely needed to consume vast amounts of vegetation. This, along with large herds, is believed to have given this bovine a profound impact on its environment. Since their movements created large trails, thanks to this feature, they were quite easy to track, allowing some brave predators like humans to pursue them. Of course, finding one is much easier than killing it, given that they didn't hesitate to use their horns, which we know from actual records from our own species. You see, these bulls frequently appear in African cave art, often depicted in battles, typically with other bulls, most in a head-down posture using their horns to gore enemies. In fact, their fights were so frequent that they hold the record for the highest number of violent depictions. This suggests that this bovine had a very bad temperament. This is also supported by the fact that it could run at a top speed of 56 kilometers per hour. That means anything it collided with, except a Paleoloxodonta, would likely be crushed. Of course, despite its giant horns, size, and ferocity, this did not stop us from hunting them, nor did it stop others from doing so. As you may know, many Homo species once walked the earth, but people tend to forget that it wasn't a straight line leading to us, with each species succeeding its predecessor. In reality, it's more like the branches of a tree, and there has been an incredible amount of overlap. They reached their peak during the time of the first modern humans, because about 300,000 years ago, there were 4 species of humans living in Africa, not necessarily in the same place. But that means we could have met each species individually, along with Homo sapiens, including Naledi, Rhodesiensis, and Heidelbergensis, a whole range. At that time, some of them had existed for hundreds of thousands of years, while we were the newcomers. Although they all had many similarities to us, there is reason to believe that our ancestors did not consider some species as their own kind, especially Naledi, the strangest of the group. This archaic human was quite primitive compared to the others and quite similar to Australopithecus, an even older hominid. The genus Homo originated from there, as did our ancestors. Naledi had climbing abilities, as their body structure suggested a more arboreal lifestyle. They were also less capable of efficient running on the ground. They were also quite small compared to us, being one of the smallest human species ever, with a correspondingly small brain. So far, they have not been assigned any material culture. This highlights their lower technological level, possibly making them unable to compete with us or other Homo species. Moreover, their diet was not competitive. It consisted of gritty food, picked up from the ground and covered in dirt, reflected in their typically worn teeth. Modern humans would have clearly recognized that these individuals were different, but the boundary was much blurrier with the other species, especially with Heidelbergensis. While Naledi is only known from South Africa, Heidelbergensis is found in many African countries and later even left the continent. Overall, they were quite similar to modern humans, the same height and similar brain size. The difference is that they were slightly more Neanderthal-like, shorter, broader chest, and robust build. This made them tougher and perhaps stronger than us, so if there were a fight between them and us, I know who I would bet on. They also possess technology equivalent to ours. Their remains are often associated with fire use, building shelters, spears, tools, and even art. Eventually, these advancements allowed them to spread widely, inhabiting a vast area in Africa. There, their diet was mainly meat, as they specialized in hunting large game. All of this could lead to conflict with Homo sapiens, and these conflicts could be very violent. Interestingly, it is possible that any interactions were resolved not by violence, but by speech, because studies of their hyoid bones and middle ears found that theoretically they could have had the ability to speak like us, and possessing a form of primitive language, which then supported teamwork. And, of course, some archaeological sites show advanced cooperation, including a site in Kenya with over 50 Theropithecus oswaldi slaughtered, proving Heidelbergensis was very serious. This probably also applies to Rhodesiensis, a slightly older human species discovered in Zambia, and it is so similar to Heidelbergensis in build and cranial anatomy that many consider it synonymous with that species. Rather than a separate genus, at any rate, it is clear at least that these two species were very intelligent and quite similar to us. Therefore, any contact between them and us is a subject of great interest, although currently there is no evidence of direct interaction. But at least one study claims that we interbred to some extent with some archaic humans in sub-Saharan Africa. In fact, some people believe that they are our direct ancestors. I will mention that this has been heavily criticized in recent years, but technically, it remains a possibility, although shrouded in mystery, as are our shadowy interactions with other Homo species. Another uncertain area revolves around the most terrifying baboon that nature ever created. Dinopithecus remains a mystery as to whether this primate ever met sapiens, because the fossil record is very limited, and it likely went extinct when we appeared. But it is such a strange and terrifying creature that I have to mention it. Dinopithecus, whose name literally means terrible ape, is a primate larger than the average man. Some individuals weighed up to 77 kilograms, and it was equipped with deceptively powerful muscles and a massive skull containing threatening canines, 20% larger than the canines of the largest baboons today. So far, fossils have only been found in South Africa and Ethiopia, where they are thought to have lived a life similar to baboons. They stayed on the ground and roamed the plains rather than swinging from trees. This makes potential encounters even more likely if they overlapped in time. However, unlike baboons and most of its close relatives, Dinopithecus rarely ate grass or savanna foods. Instead, it stuffed itself with fruit and occasionally a piece of meat, and paleontologists believe it was an opportunistic omnivore, perhaps eating more meat than most primates up to that time. Moreover, thanks to its size and formidable canines, some have speculated that the smaller ancestral species before us might have been its occasional snack, with the only glimmer of hope that, thanks to our size and technology, we might be safe. Obviously, I don't wish harm for our ancestors, but it would be great if they actually lived with this baboon among the asteroids. But although not as dangerous, there is another animal just as strange as Dinopithecus that certainly lived alongside us. Rhinoceroses, a new dinosaur-like creature, looks a bit odd compared to living even-toed ungulates, thanks to its long and thick neck. But you cannot tell it's strange just by looking. Instead, you have to use your ears, because this mammal does not look like a dinosaur. But it certainly sounds like a dinosaur, specifically like a hadrosaurid when first discovered. Paleontologists observed that inside the skull, Rhinoceroses had a large trumpet-shaped nasal structure. It looks unlike any other mammal, although it bears an uncanny resemblance to the structure of a hadrosaur. In fact, its design is so unique that researchers did not know of any other animal besides lambeosauran hadrosaurs with similar anatomy. The researchers who discovered the creature believe it evolved convergently due to a shared lifestyle with hadrosaurs. Since both lived in large herds in relatively open areas, a unique form of communication would be very useful. Furthermore, both hadrosaurs and Rhinoceroses had very specialized diets, and thus their teeth as well. This indirectly may have led them to develop unique skull structures, thereby creating their nasal tubes. In the case of Rhinoceroses, it is believed they could produce sounds much lower than the normal vocal range, possibly reaching infrasound, frequencies too low for humans to hear. In other words, they could be having a loud argument, and still be appropriate in a library. Perhaps their silence can make you hungry. And I say this because among the species in the list so far, Rhinoceroses is the only one known, with bone evidence confirming it was preyed upon by sapiens, with a group found in Kenya, showing butchery marks and lying next to human tools. And the way that group died suggests that humans may have hunted this large bovine en masse. And some speculate that we ourselves ultimately caused their extinction. Another animal species went extinct alongside them, but perhaps not due to humans. It is a species that at first glance looks very familiar, Metridio Kerus, an extinct species of pig whose appearance almost exactly copies the warthog we know today. In fact, it is believed to be their direct ancestor. But the big difference is that this animal was gigantic. The average individual was as large as the biggest living warthogs today, and most were about 1.52 meters long. This was impressive already, but where things really get crazy is in terms of weight. Because although today you can find warthogs of similar length, Metridio Kerus was extremely stocky. Some species were even called compactos. Individuals could weigh twice as much as a warthog of the same length, and some estimates even show weights over half a ton for the largest specimens. Essentially, it was a horse but in the shape of a warthog. As is known, warthogs can be somewhat irritable and aggressive, and this was probably a common trait of this ancient pig. A possibility even worse when Metriodocus had 4 tusks that were longer, sharper, and straighter than today's tusks, making its head almost like the tail of a stegosaurus. Like its living relatives, Metridio Kerus probably used these tusks for many functions, including combat, so it was better to stay away from them. A bit difficult because they were found over a large part of the continent and often lived in herds. Both this animal and the other mentioned species were not the only ones present at the time. There were also more varieties of rhinoceroses, zebras, and giraffes. Unlike this pig, their size was not necessarily huge compared to their relatives, but they had their own unique features. For example, there was a subspecies of zebra found in the Sahara, a place where there are no zebras today. Then there was a species of giraffe slightly taller than the modern one. It also liked to move out of Africa occasionally, as indicated by known fossils from Turkey. And then, perhaps most interestingly, there was a species of woolly rhinoceros, specifically Estephanorhinus emetois, the steppe rhinoceros. Unlike the current species, this rhinoceros was found in North Africa over 200,000 years ago. Compared to living rhinos, the steppe rhino preferred slightly colder habitats, which probably led to its light coat. That made it somewhat like the woolly rhinoceros, although not as big, but comparable to the white rhinoceros. Despite its name, this rhinoceros could be found patrolling forests and densely wooded areas, where we know it frequently came into contact with humans, thanks to many fossils showing regular hunting and processing. There is even a set of stone tools in Jordan dating back about 250,000 years. It seems hard to believe that ancient humans could bring down such a large animal with simple tools. But through experimentation, I discovered that these weapons were capable of more than one might think. Simple wooden spears could easily pierce vital organs if they slipped between the ribs, while stone spearheads could even penetrate bone. By this time, humans had developed sophisticated stone tools that were attached to spears and probably thrown. These people could take down any animal in their world with the right strategy. There is also evidence that this creature was valued and revered, because it is one of the few animals that occasionally became prey for Neanderthal hunters, and the skulls were kept as trophies. Interestingly, although this animal shows many signs of being hunted, a study found that there is little evidence that its extinction around 35,000 years ago was due to overhunting, although, as with many other extinctions during the Pleistocene, this remains controversial. Overall, this follows the trend because although many animals went extinct in Africa during the late Pleistocene, they seem doomed with or without us compared to the rest of the world, and Africa retained a significant amount of its large animal populations, megafauna. That is the main reason why extinct humans did not actually see so many strange creatures, because in short, the strangest species are still with us and we will try to keep it that way.